I've lived everywhere, man. In Texas, anyway. From Waco to Lubbock, Corpus to El Paso, Dallas to San Antonio, with Houston in between. From the defenders of the Alamo centuries ago to Medal of Honor winners of today. We don't ever want to forget the contributions our Mexican-American forefathers have made to enrich the lives of all Texans. We also want to recognize today's rising stars that are paving the way for Texas' next 200 years. May God bless Texas. This is TXMX TV. Hi, and welcome to another episode of TXMX TV. This is Orlando Salazar, your host, and we are extremely happy to have you with us today. We have an unbelievable man here with us, has an incredible story. It's one that is going to be truly interesting to hear. I would consider him one of the most interesting men in the world, because he has an unbelievable story. We're so happy to have Richard Diaz with us. He has a background in military, in intelligence, in wearing different types of costumes, and well, we're going to hear about it in just a little bit. But Richard, we're so glad to have you with us today on TXMX TV.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come here to speak with you today.
Well, our listeners and our viewers are going to find this to be a treat to hear about your life and to hear about your humble beginnings and what you've been able to achieve just as being a normal human being, much less what you're going to share with us about your personal story and about your body, your physique, and what happened to you as a young man. So let's go ahead and get started. Tell us about growing up here in Texas and your early life, your early childhood.
Well, my family, they're from McAllen, Westaco, Edinburgh, far area. My parents both were born in Westaco, and my grandparents were from Mexico. I was conceived in Westaco, but I was actually born a month later in Peoria, Illinois. But I would spend my entire summers down in Westaco with my family, and my entire family, both sides, my mother's side, my father's side, were migrant workers. They worked in the fields. They traveled all over the place, from Ohio to Michigan, all over Texas, different parts of the country, depending on the picking seasons. Um, you know, Grew up pretty poor. There were actually nine of us in a one-bedroom house, one bathroom. So it was definitely an interesting time as a child. Uh, but growing up, I had a couple of strikes against me. Being poor and then being Hispanic during that time frame, and the late '60s and the '70s was very difficult.
So eventually you must have been living in a certain place for long enough to attend junior high, high school, those years. Where did you live during those years?
I actually lived in outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I graduated out of school in Ohio. My father got a different job and he moved us quite a bit, and it was a good upbringing, but definitely a lot of challenges.
For sure. I mean, during those years, being a part of a family of nine, moving around a lot. As I was growing up, I moved around a little bit, but not nearly as much as you did. And making new friends, being in new places is tough on a young person. So after high school, what happened?
Okay, well, here's the bottom line. My entire premise is when I was growing up was that I wanted to be an FBI agent. I mean, that was my entire life. And I grew up knowing that's what I wanted to do. And when I graduated high school, I knew neither my parents or I could afford for me to go to college. So I did the next best thing, and I joined the military. I joined the Air Force in the mid '80s, and I went into law enforcement because I knew that was going to give me a step up to get into the FBI. And I spent a lot of time in the military knowing that this is what I wanted to do. I traveled overseas to Turkey. I actually got involved in some undercover operations as part of the military, targeting the Turkish mafia, uh, you know, for black marketing and drugs going throughout Southern Europe. I actually had my cover blown at that time, and almost lost my life, but we got exfilled out of the country after that. But after that, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life, was to become an FBI agent. And I did everything I could to try to get to that point. I finished my degree, and I ended up down in San Angelo, Texas, as an intelligence instructor. And I finally, when I was down there, my dream came true. I actually got accepted in the FBI, and I was a few months out from the FBI Academy when I went out jogging on the side of the road out in the desert like I normally would in San Angelo, and a truck ran off the road and hit me, injuring my right arm. It was a hit and run, and he left me there in the desert, basically to die. Um, Fortunately, I got up and managed to get myself to the road, and had a lot of major issues. One car drove by, they looked at me, they kept going. This happened two or three more times before finally somebody decided to stop to help me out. But I ended up with a brachial plexus injury. I had the C2, 3, and C5 nerves pulled from my spine, and my right arm was paralyzed. And it was a real difficult thing for me to do because I knew the FBI was definitely going to be out. And I was going to have life saving surgery that was going to help repair my arm. But a week and a half before the surgery, my father was killed in a plane crash. So I had to delay the surgery, ultimately not being able to get my arm movement back. Uh, so I was forcibly kicked out of the Air Force and told by the FBI, because I can't shoot a gun, I'm out there as well.
Boy, sounds like a lot of adversity. And I can imagine that your dreams, you can see them, being disappearing. After all this happened, your dad dying, going through this accident. But obviously, we're here to tell a story, and this story must have a really good ending
Yeah.
because you're our guest today. So there's always the rest of the story. So after these
Yeah.
difficulties, after these hard times, what happened next?
So, I was unemployed, and I eventually got a job with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, which actually led me to the CIA's Inspector General's office. And once I got in the CIA, I realized that my dreams of being an FBI agent weren't there because they said I couldn't shoot a gun. So what I did is I decided I wanted to be a CIA case officer. And at that time, there had been nobody with a disability that had ever been a CIA case officer because people didn't think it was possible. Um, and I was assigned to the Counterterrorism Center. And while I was working there, I volunteered for an overseas assignment to some war zones after 9/11. And part of that requirement was that I had to qualify with a weapon. So I said, okay, let me go ahead and do this. And I went in and put in the application to go to the shooting range, and I was denied 5 times because they couldn't accommodate my disability. They said there was more priority with people who could actually shoot a gun to go to the war zone, and but that I didn't give up. I actually found an office at CI headquarters that was willing to certify me locally. And when they did that, they presented some other problems. I had to figure out how to do everything somebody did with a Glock with two arms with one hand. So I always say this: necessity is the mother of invention. So what I figured out how to do was I took a Glock right side magazine holder, put it on the left side behind my holster for the magazines, and I came up with a technique where I could actually draw a gun, fire, put the gun back in the holster, switch the magazines, and continue firing, and also fix jams using a Kydex holster. And I was able to fire like 3 shots in less than 2.5 seconds, and then within 5 seconds fixing a jam with one hand, which was basically unheard of at the time. And I ended up qualifying to do that. And I was the first person with a disability with one arm to ever qualify in the CIA with one arm with a Glock. So from there, I went on to my first war zone, and immediately getting into the war zone, I started being asked a lot of questions. Well, what are you doing here? You're disabled. Why are you carrying a gun? And basically, I had to prove myself, which I had to do with almost every assignment. And I remember going out one night doing an operation, and we usually had security forces go out in front of us to pave the way. And I was in the back seat, and I had three other guys in the car with me, in the truck with me. And security forces at that time said, "Okay, you're clear to go." So we started driving down the road, and then Sergeant pulled out with an AK-47, and I was in the back seat, and I was in charge of this unit, and I had to make a split-second decision there. And usually, when something like this happens, you only have seconds to make a decision, and I had to decide one of three things: either try to run the guy over, but we were in a unarmored vehicle with thin-skinned, that the bullets would have gone right through, could have killed everybody. Number two, I was a pretty good shot at the time, but it was pitch black, and I would have to make about a 20-yard shot in the pitch black dark to stop this guy from shooting us. I thought, well, it wasn't worth the risk. The third option was to trust my translator who was driving the vehicle to talk our way out of it. And fortunately, I chose the latter, which got us out of the situation. Um, but after that, nobody ever questioned my ability operating in a war zone. Another kind of
Let me,
funny incident. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, let me ask you this. Were you right-handed at the time that you were injured?
No, I was left-handed, so I
So
was fortunate.
you were fortunate that you had that strong arm and that you were able to
Yep,
continue using that arm and that hand.
yep.
The other thing is this good Samaritan that stopped and helped you. Have you kept in touch with that person up to this day?
I know I had not. I mean, I did for a while afterwards, and it was actually an Air Force member and his wife,
Well,
which was really nice. And I do. I mean, it was up to them. The problem that the really thing that really got to me then is that I had three other cars just past me, like I was nothing, and just kept going. And it was just, I'll never forget that.
well, the wonderful thing is that somebody did stop and they helped you. And because of their help, our military was blessed, our country was blessed, your family was blessed by the fact that you're still here with us and that you were able to accomplish so much. So tell us more about the end of your career in the
Hmm.
CIA and then what happened after that.
Sure. The so uh, I was able to deploy out to, I probably had more than 8 tours. I traveled around about 37 different countries. And the key to the success that I had in the agency was the ability to use my disability to my advantage. For example, I was able to work in one country where I set up a network of other disabled people in that city because they trusted me because I was disabled. Um, you know, and I was able to use that because when somebody sees me, I'm not a threat to them. And then by the time they figured out who I was, it was too late. I already had them recruited. So it made it a lot easier for me. It gave me advantage over a lot of other officers. Um, and I just ended my career back last year, and I started my own consulting company, Alcor International, where I advise companies around the world and around the United States on security, personal security issues. I also advise them on how to spot, assess, and develop and recruit clients that would be difficult to get.
Well, during the time that you were being recognized for some of your accomplishments, you shared an interesting story about what happened at a country club and how somebody
Oh yes,
mistook you for an employee. So why
yeah,
don't you share that story with
yeah,
us?
yeah. There's a couple of stories tied to that. Even the day that the day I got accepted in the agency, family and I went out to celebrate. Wore a brand new suit and went out there to this public country club. And we walked in the door, and this older white lady threw her keys at me and said that make sure not to scratch her car. And my family just looked at everything in shock. you know, and just couldn't figure out why she thought I was working there. But again, because I was Hispanic, that's the first thing she assumed. Um, but yeah, it was very disappointing. I mean, I have an expression I put because of that. You can put a monkey, you can put a monkey in a suit, but in the end, it's still a monkey, and that's kind of what how I felt with that. And I remember a couple days, well, a couple months later, I was at a Home Depot parking lot with my daughter, and we were getting grass or some sod for the put in our car, and the guy comes up to me and says, "Well, go ahead and load up my car over here," and for the same reason. And like I said, and I was dressed nice. I was in a nice car. Had another incident. We just bought a $500,000 house and mowing my grass, and somebody comes up to me and asks me how much. So, you know, the struggle's still there.
Well, believe it or not, the story you just shared happened to a really famous person, and his name is Lee Trevino, who we all know as a world champion
Yeah,
golfer. And he
yeah,
shares a very similar story here in Dallas where he was cutting his grass, and a lady stopped and said, "How much do you charge for doing yards?" His story was
yeah. You
really
can't
funny.
believe it.
Have you heard this story? What he,
Yes, I have. I've heard
what
this
his
story
answer
before.
was?
Well, no.
His answer was, "Well, the lady that lives here lets me sleep with her." Of course, the lady that lived there was
I
his
like that.
wife. So anyway,
That's hilarious.
yeah, that's a funny story. But anyway, look, and I've interviewed so many wonderful Mexican American heroes and achievers doing this show, and one of the things I love about the fact that the people that we talk to is that they don't let those things keep us down. They've never let
No,
that mentality or that viewpoint keep them from achieving what they wanted to achieve.
yeah.
And you have been the same. So tell us about your family. Tell us about your wife and your kids and some of the other parts of your life that obviously must be very meaningful for you.
Yeah, no, they were definitely my rock. They're the ones that kept me going and to get me through all this for all these years. Particularly my wife was the most important person in my life that helped me out a lot.
Well, we're
And
showing a picture
yeah,
of your I guess some of your
you did, yeah.
ancestors there. Who
This
are we looking
this
at
goes
there?
way back. This goes back early 1900s, and they were in my great grandmother's house after she died. And their family members, I'm not exactly sure who they are, but it goes way, 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 way back. But this is when they had just crossed the border into the United States, and they were trying to get themselves started in Wesico. Uh, but I remember her telling me stories of just how difficult it was even back then to get recognized, especially as a Latinos coming across the border there in the United States at that time period.
Well, it's interesting being Hispanic, because of our skin color, we can blend into a lot of different types of nationalities and different
Hmm.
ethnicities. So that must have really come in handy for you when you were stationed in those parts
Yeah,
of the world.
that was the key for me. Yeah, that was the key. Was I was able to blend in probably to about 97% places around the world, and if I didn't open my mouth, people wouldn't know who I was. And I was able to use disguises and other things to play different roles, and I was able to get away with it, which kind of gave me advantage over a lot of other officers. And one of the key things to that as well is when I graduated from our training course to be a case officer, which I was the first one to do that as well. They wanted to put me in Latin America. I said no, because I didn't want to be typecasted, and I went to another part of the world to operate, and I think that was to my advantage.
Well, and there was a lot more interesting things going on in other parts of the world. The need for someone with your talents and abilities were much more acute in other parts of the world than they were in Latin America. So I'm so glad that you made that decision and that you asked for that because you were really able to use your talents in those different parts of the world where things were a lot more urgent.
Oh yeah, definitely agreed, especially after 9/11.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. Well, tell us about your business now. Tell us about the
Yeah.
types of work that you're doing, some of the countries that you've been able to go and start your business in, or perform your use your talents and abilities. Uh,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Well, one of the things, sure. I started a company. It's called Alcor International. Again, right now it's a company of one with my wife, as I call her my CFO because she manages all the finances. Um, and what I do is basically provide advice to companies. For example, there was a Wall Street company was asking questions about how to go after difficult clients. So basically, is what I did is I took the intelligence recruitment cycle and I converted it into a business recruitment cycle, and I taught their financial advisors how to spot, assess, develop, and go after different targets that are difficult to get, and that worked pretty successfully. And I'm also traveling overseas. I can't really get into details on where I go, but I also provide security advice uh, around the world and for different countries on just how to take care of themselves, how to keep secure, how to secure facilities, security checks, vulnerability assessments, and so forth. And I also do some volunteer work for NGOs, um, working on their security assessments and how to keep their volunteers safe while they're traveling overseas.
Well, I don't know if you're bilingual. I don't know if you actually speak Spanish. Maybe you do,
Yeah, I do speak Spanish.
but did that ever come in handy for you, being able to use your Spanish language abilities at all?
Yeah, it has. It has definitely, especially when I go down to, when I travel to Latin America, it's a big help. Um, I, Growing up, it was a stigma for my parents because of what happened to them as migrant workers. So they were actually afraid for us to learn Spanish because they didn't want us to be stereotyped. But I did pick it up because I spent all my summers with my grandparents down in Texas. Not totally fluent, but it's pretty good, and I'm getting more fluent the more I practice.
Well, you live in Washington D.C. or in that area,
Yep.
and
Yep.
do you get back to Texas even now that you're living up there?
I No, I haven't been for a long time because a lot of my family's moved up to Illinois and other parts in Florida and Ohio. But I do want to get back to Texas because I do miss it, and I love the food.
Well, today's an interesting day. It's election day, and it's a time where we think about our country, about patriotism, about our forefathers. And tell me your thoughts about, not necessarily about which way you would vote, but your feelings being a former military service member and what you've seen in the CIA and different areas where you've served.
Sure.
You know, tell us what you're thinking about today.
I think the really important thing is to keep focused on God and country. That's the most important thing. And I've seen it, after 9/11, patriotism really kicked in. It was really strong within the military, within the agency that I work for. People were out there to do it for the cause. And that eventually waned to the generation coming in saying, what's in it for me versus what's in it for the whole. And that's something I think we need to get back to, is to be able to do it and serve for God and country. Keeping ourselves involved, but we need to push back more towards the way it was after 9/11, where people were there because they wanted to be there and they wanted to do the right thing. And then they're not in it for themselves.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and you're right. I think as a Hispanic community, we've always been about that, right? We've been about God and country,
Yes.
and being a very conservative-minded people. So we appreciate you and your service, what you've done for our country in the midst of having that accident and still going on and living out your dream. And as Americans, as Hispanics, we've been able to benefit from the fact that you didn't let that accident stop you and that you went on and accomplished such amazing things for yourself, for our country, and for your family. So, Richard, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate hearing your story. It's very inspiring, and can't wait to see what you're going to be able to accomplish from here on out. in your business endeavors.
Definitely look forward to it, and I appreciate the opportunity. Again, I think the important part of this is that no matter what adversities come down in front of you, you can overcome them. And I know, especially in the Latino community, there are a lot of adversities, a lot of things, people think they're holding them back. And I have a saying that if you can't get in the door, you go in through a window. You just can't give up. And you got to keep fighting for what's right. And you got to keep fighting for our community, and you got to keep fighting for this country.
Well, those are wonderful words, and I love that. You know, we should have the mentality and the approach that nobody owes us anything, right? Nobody owes us anything.
Yep.
Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence says that we have the right to pursue happiness. It's not guaranteed, but as you said, if you don't let anything hold you down, you can continue to pursue happiness and pursue whatever you want to in life. With God's help, we can get there. Well, Richard, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You bet. And if any of you out there have any ideas for someone who would be a good guest for TXMX TV, please send us that information. We've got a website, an email address where you can send us that information. That's TXMXTV.com, and we would love to get your input on having a future guest on our show. We're always willing and able to take that information and bring on new people to the show for you to get to meet, and that's actually info@TXMXTV.com. To end the show, we always use our Vaya con Dios segment, and today our segment is an interesting verse. Our guest, Richard, lost an arm because of an accident. And he obviously had one real strong arm, one good arm. And we find in the book of Psalms that the psalmist says, "Mighty is your arm, strong is your hand, your right hand is exalted." So we can look to God for his strong right arm. Strength is important as long as it comes from God. And he says in the book of Jeremiah, don't depend, the rich man shouldn't depend on his riches, or the strong man on his strength, or the wise man on his wisdom, but that we should depend on God. And when we do that, we delight him. We bring delight to God. So let's depend on him, depend on his strength. And when you're in need of that extra part in your life where you might be lacking, depend on him, and he's always there to help you. Thank you for being with us on this segment of TXMX TV. God bless you, and we'll see you again soon.